Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Dixon Morisseau, and I am very honored and pleased to share this specific topic with you. And this topic is on multicultural representation in film music. So I'd like to start with a brief introduction of myself. Um, I am a first generation Haitian American born and raised in Berklee, New York, and I grew up in a very artistic family, um, where most of us we specialize in like visual arts, poetry, dance, all the like. However, on my maternal side, we're mostly comprised of musicians, courtesy of my grandfather, Reverend Maurice Guillaume, whom you see on the right picture. Um, because of this, growing in a lot in this particular side of the family, I've been immersed in a lot of music, and because of that, I've been playing music for about 20 plus years. Growing up in New York City, I've been very fortunate to have witnessed an amalgamation of cultures, from hearing stories of immigrants to trying out assorted types of foods, establishing meaningful relationships throughout my school career and whatnot. And all these things have introduced me to an exposure to all sorts of media, from discovering kung fu flicks from my dad to watching telenovelas, understanding the differences of music in the Caribbean, such as compa, bachata, reggae, etc., to being enamored and inspired by music in anime and K-dramas. And I've gained more, along the years, I've gained more of an appreciation and understanding for music of these different cultures. And as it has been going on, I've been wondering, why aren't there many infusions of music in media? A few months ago, it was brought to my attention that Grammy Award on artist John Batiste, he was being interviewed on CNN and regarding his album World Music Radio. And he said this one thing that was very profound and it caught my ear. And that was, music is put into these little countries called genres. And when he said that, that made a lot of sense to me. Because if you really think about it, I could give you a few examples. Let's say you were to take a trip to Ecuador, and the primary music that you would hear over there would be pasillo. If you go to Brazil, we know that the country is mostly associated with bossa nova. If you were to go to France, you would hear like France chanson. If you were to go to Mongolia, you would hear Tuvan throat singing. And the beautiful thing about all this is that we also see these instances in films in the States as well that explore these cultural themes. For example, we have The Mask of Zorro, composed by James Horner. In this movie, he uses elements of Spanish flamenco as a basis of pointing out time and setting and characters of importance within this film. Throughout this film, we see that it takes place in the 1840s California that is under Spanish rule during the time of the Mexican War of Independence. Another another film, The Joy Club, composed by Rachel Porter, she highlights traditional Chinese instruments such as the erhu and the zizi flute, to signify cultural traditions and familiarity within the story, commemorating cultural themes of Chinese tradition while exploring the complex relationship between an immigrant mother and her daughters. And finally, for this, another example is Mo Better Blues, composed by Bill Lee, featuring the music of the Branford Marsalis Quintet with Terence Blanchard on trumpet. In this film, Bill Lee uses contemporary jazz as a cornerstone of this film, while highlighting themes revolving around its characters. So, with all these examples in mind, is there a way to implement cultural musical growth in film music? I say yes. And how do we do that? But the premise of my goal is take various musical elements found in different cultures, putting them all together into one space. This concept is taken from Bruce Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do, which pretty much sums up to this quote: adapt what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. Now, why am I speaking of Bruce Lee in this sense? Um, Growing up, I've been very immersed in martial arts thanks to my dad. And Bruce Lee was one of the first people that he introduced me to. And upon like watching his movies and learning about his philosophy, he he makes something very clear. He said like regardless of style, a punch is still a punch. A kick is still a kick, just different interpretations depending on what style of martial arts you're doing, yet they all serve the same function. This philosophy can also be applied to music. A string instrument is a string instrument. A drum head is a drum head. They may have different interpretations and variations in different cultures, yet they all have the same function. This isn't only this project isn't only a means of stylistic adaptation where musical parameters are contingent on theme settings and characters of a developing story. It is also a factor of compositional voice development as well, where taking in these instances can set trajectories of impacting the art of visual storytelling. And the thing is that we have already seen examples of these in the last several years. For example, we have Wakanda Forever, scored by Ludwig Göransson, in which he blends African and Mayan elements in the modern world. Throughout this film, Ludwig Göransson took the same um method he took when he scored Black Panther by going into the African continent and learning from different assorted musicians, learning about what their music was like for that particular project. And with this project, Wakanda Forever, Ludwig Göransson, he went to Yucatan to meet with musicians who spoke the Mayan language as well as played Mayan instruments. And throughout learning of all this, he was able to blend the two worlds of African music and Mayan music in order to create like this elaborate world of Wakanda and Talokan. Another example is the Netflix series Blue Eye Samurai, scored by Amy Doherty, in which she was challenged to interweave Japanese and Western tonalities to extenuate internal conflict. Throughout the music in this series, um, Amy Doherty uses Japanese and Western tonalities to explore the protagonist, whose her name is Mizu, to explore her inner turmoil as she feels stuck between her Eastern and Western identities, living in a time in 17th century Japan where it was highly shunned for someone to be half Japanese. And we also see this in Insomniac Spider-Man Miles Morales, which is on PlayStation 4, scored by John Pisano. In this particular game, um, Pisano places emphasis on Miles Morales' Puerto Rican and African American background while extenuating his love for jazz and hip hop, serving as a coming of age story in a sense, in which Miles Morales had to learn to what it means to be a superhero as he prepared to take on the mantle of Spider-Man. With all of this in mind, I had to come up with an approach for this project. Originally, what I wanted to do was create a whole short film based on this idea. However, due to unfortunate circumstances, I had to shift a bit. And I was encouraged to take a very different approach, which I sort of entertained at first, but then I really got into it. And what this approach was rescoring video games. I knew that if I really wanted to get my point, if I really wanted to make sure that I was getting my point across for this particular topic, I needed to focus on cinematics and gameplay. Cinematics because It's like if you were to play a video game and you see cutscenes, it's like you're watching a movie. So in that aspect, I was learning more about how to prepare how to prepare the audience for a story that is going on, where we're able to guide the viewer or the gamer into whatever goes on in the story regarding underscoring and whatnot. And gameplay is a whole other aspect that I had to learn because in this aspect, composers aren't usually given the opportunity, given like the inclination of, okay, this is what you need to do in regard to like predicting what taking on place in a game. In this aspect, everything is about immersive action. So whatever music is being scored, it had to get the player in the moment. So these are the things that I had to learn. So my process throughout all this was involved two things. Video game capture function that is on the PlayStation 4, where it's where there's a function that allows you to do like a screenplay. And another thing I had to do was speed running because I wanted to make sure that whatever thing I wanted to tackle, whatever subject I wanted to hone in on, I need to make sure I get into that and not focus on side missions. So the game that I chose to do was Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed is an anthology of games that focuses on two factions battling each other throughout specific points in world history. You have your assassins, who are a faction on a mission to enact peace through freedom. Contrary to them, you have the Templars, in order that too seeks peace, albeit it is through like order, like establishing order. For the sake of this project, I decided to focus on three anthology titles and to treat them as one whole game. The reason why is that if you were to play a fantasy game, you would see like there are points in which the protagonist would be in different areas meeting different people and how all those different people have their specific cultures and music that represents them. So before I introduce those three titles, I want to talk about themes. This is a very important thing because as we listen to all the examples that we have, I would like you all to incline your ear to these melodies that I'm going to share with you. The first thing I focused on was creating a melody for the Assassins faction. And I'd like to play this example for you right now. So as we see in this example, we see that the motif that I created for the assassins has like a hopeful feeling, that a feeling that invokes hope and freedom. Contrary, when we listen to the Templar motif, you will see that it is quite different. Okay. And with this theme, we see that what's the word? It is quite different because there's a more dissonant, threatening nature throughout this motif. So I would like you all to incline your ears as we listen to the examples that I'm about to share with you. So the first game that I chose to tackle is Assassin's Creed 3. The timeline is in the timeline takes place in the American Revolution. The setting is in New York and Boston. This is what the synopsis reads. Ratuna Keton, also known as Connor Kenway, is an assassin from Kenyan Keha and English blood. And he finds himself in the middle of the American Revolution learning of the morally gray areas of the Assassins and Templars within the colonial and British camps while fighting his own battle of protecting his land and people. So with this, I had to take an ethnomusical approach. And what I chose to focus on was Native American flutes, powwow drums, and hammered dulcimers. Knowing that he's Native American, flutes and powwow drums was definitely a given, but the hammered dulcimer was very important, especially for this, because I wanted to signify Connor and Connor's relationship with his father that you will see, as well as the internal struggle of being both Native American and British amidst the Revolutionary War. All right, so next one, the next part of the anthology that I chose to tackle was Assassin's Creed Liberation. The timeline with this is from the ending of the French and Indian War leading into American Revolution. Um, Setting is in colonial French Louisiana, New Orleans. The synopsis reads, Aveline de Grandpe, a French assassin and liberator of slaves, fights the Templars' attempt to gain control of New Orleans following the end of the French and Indian War. So around this time, historically, um, New Orleans was pretty much owned by France, and this area was controlled by French bureaucrats who were also slave owners, which means that there were also slaves from the African continent as well as the French colony of Saint-Domingue, which later becomes known as Haiti. So with this particular game, the ethnomusical approach that I chose to tackle with this is a combination of French Baroque with a percussive emphasis on traditional Haitian rhythm known as Zepol Nago. Now, the last part of this anthology that I chose to do was, where is it? Yes, Assassin's Creed Unity. The timeline takes place from the French Revolution going into the Reign of Terror. The setting takes place in Paris, France, and the synopsis reads, as the nation of France tears itself apart, Arnaud Dorian, an assassin during the French Revolution, makes his efforts to expose the true powers behind the revolution, all while seeking revenge on those responsible for the murder of his adopted father. Now, with this particular game, I had to take a completely different approach. The reason why is because this game is primarily centered in Paris, France, which means there was no inclination of multicultural music to explore. However, because this game is still tied into the stories of Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed Liberation due to the notion of that they all follow, I chose to take the approach of primarily consisting the score being 19th century, well, taking influences from 19th century French chamber music. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the likes of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Joseph Bellone, also known as Chevalier du Saint George. So these are the elements that you're going to hear a lot in these next two videos. As I come to a close, I would like to revisit the question, why multicultural representation in music? Um, so as an individual who has learned to see the cultural beauty of what makes the world through musical differences, and having witnessed stories in film maturing throughout the years through ethnocultural inclusivity, I see myself taking part in an ever evolving growth of composers and storytellers that challenge themselves to include these multicultural instances and nuances that are highlighted by character, setting, and themes. Um, just as the examples I shared before with Wakanda Forever, Miles Morales, just to name a few. Um, the film industry is definitely growing, and we've been seeing that throughout. And I consider myself to take part in this ever-growing change. Um, so with that being said, what's next for me? Um, I have a short film that I'm in the midst of completing in regarding the production part. So I'm excited for getting that finished so that I can move on to the scoring aspect. Um, I'm also collaborating with a few composers on several projects in regarding short films that have amazing stories, and there's so much to explain about regarding that. And also along the way, I intend to gradually make an imprint in the media industry, one note at a time.